The latest out of Iraq now to break down how the U.S. should proceed is Ambassador Richard Haass, president of the Council on Foreign Relations and, of course, author of the book War of Necessity, War of Choice, a memoir of two Iraq wars. Richard, great to see you as always. Let's start with a report issued today by the progressive think tank, the Center for American Progress. They're saying that the U.S. should prepare for measures including possible airstrikes. This group, CAP, the Center for American Progress, they have a very close relationship with the White House. It's almost a revolving door in terms of people working there and working at the White House. Do you think that this is, reading the tea leaves, an indication of where the president is heading?
Well, look, at some point we're likely to do airstrikes. The real question is what's the context. Imagine this was just another terrorist group, I'm talking about ISIS, operating in some no man's land, either in Syria or Iraq. That's the sort of thing we do airstrikes or drone strikes or even special forces missions against. We probably do that, Jake, in what, 10, 15, 20 countries. The bigger question is whether we would ever do airstrikes somehow in concert with an Iranian-backed government in Baghdad, and I think that's a much more complicated and more controversial issue. But counter-terrorist strikes, why not?
Last week on The Lead, you said that if you were advising President Obama, you would be very careful about direct military support. Obviously, that was last week. That was a lifetime ago. Do you still think that? Is it possible to handle the situation without direct military support?
Well, I think so, because what you're going to have already is massive Iranian support for the Maliki government. So-called Shia volunteers will flock to Baghdad and the outskirts. So what you're seeing is essentially the dismantlement of Iraq, and I do think with Iranian backing, the government, which is very much in the service of Iran and is very sensitive, if you will, to sectarian issues, they'll probably survive. The Kurds have gone their own way in the north. You have this no man's land in the northwest, which will be this kind of counterterrorism zone. So I would limit, at the moment, I would limit U.S. efforts to going after them as if they were a terrorist group anywhere else.
The U.S. public has gotten a nasty lesson in the concept of blowback in the last 15 years. One of the things that we're hearing here a lot in Washington, D.C., and I'm sure you're hearing a lot, too, at the Council on Foreign Relations, is the idea that if we do not act, if the United States does not do military strikes, the blowback could be that ISIS gains strength and then ISIS fighters come to the U.S., start attacking the U.S. homeland. What's the blowback if the U.S. does strike? What are the risks on that side?
Well, if we do strikes, hopefully we would do them to weaken ISIS in Syria. It's the reason that I argued for doing strikes in Syria when Mr. Assad didn't do things with, didn't give up his chemical weapons. We should be arming the non-radical opposition in Syria, which, by the way, would give ISIS a flank to worry about back in Syria. But we're going to have blowback either way, Jake. And what you put your finger on, the fact that these guys are going to Syria or Iraq. This is now, if you will, the new Afghanistan. This is their graduate school. And we've got to assume that these people are going to return to Europe, elsewhere in the Middle East, or the United States with some skills and with even more radicalism. So I think we have to gird ourselves for that. And that's probably going to happen now, whether we do airstrikes or drone strikes or not.
It's been pointed out, of course, that the war in Iraq, there really were no Islamic militants in Iraq when the war started in 2003, the kind that we're talking about now in ISIS. And there's no small irony to that, but we've seen a lot of former Bush officials talking about the controversy and the chaos in Iraq. Former Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz was on MSNBC earlier saying that stopping ISIS was, quote, about preventing another 9/11. I know that you believe that there is a potential terrorist threat from ISIS if they succeed in taking Iraq and if they succeed in thriving in Syria, but is that overstating the case, do you think, another 9/11?
Well, that's a worst possible case, but these guys are setting up shop in Syria and parts of Iraq. They're not unique, by the way. You've probably got a dozen countries in Africa and the Middle East where the central governments are unable or willing to police their own territory. And we got to assume that some of these individuals will get on airplanes and some of them will get through our security and police systems. That's what life is like. But that doesn't necessarily argue for specific action. Also, I think it's important to realize that what we've done is set in motion in the Middle East over the years a set of policies where we help destroy existing authorities, and we've helped create vacuums where groups like this now are able to gain traction and pose a threat. We've also created a situation, say, in Iraq, where a country like Iran has a lot more influence than it did, and it ought to make us very cautious in the future. We got to play chess and not checkers in thinking through the strategic consequences of what it is we're prepared to do. As bad as things are, what the Middle East teaches us is the need to be careful because things can get worse.
Indeed. Richard Haass, author of War of Necessity, War of Choice, a memoir of two wars, president of the Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you so much.